Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. In 2023, business email compromise, or BEC, is still a moneymaker for fraudsters, according to the latest report by the FBI. So here's a quick look at the stats compared to 2022 and before the pandemic. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 281. According to the FBI, BEC scams still worked in 2023, and this stat continues to increase. So, in case you're not aware, the FBI has an Internet Crime Complaint Center where consumers, businesses can report fraud incidents. Now, the website for this is ic3.gov, right? So, Internet Crime Complaint Center, 3Cs, so ic3.gov. And you can go there anytime. You can look at industry alerts, consumer alerts, and they have lots of information on there. But they publish every year an IC3 report to summarize all of the complaints, the type of frauds, and other statistics. So every year I wait on that report to see what the numbers were, the stats were for the year before, and what the trends are. And so now, 2023, the report summarizing that year, last year, is out. And so I wanted to do a really quick podcast to talk about the numbers that relate specifically to business email compromise. And by the way, the cumulative numbers for total number of incidents, I always report those, but those include like all incidents of fraud, not just business email compromise, but the average number of incidents reported per day in 2019 was 1,300. In 2023, that number almost doubled to 2,400 and 12, actually, to be exact, per day in 2023. So that again almost doubled, but it does include all reports or all types of fraud incidents, not just business email compromise. So let's now look specifically at business email compromise and how that has unfortunately grown in 2023. Now, what's funny is I track three stats related to business email compromise. I track the count, like the number of incidents reported. And by the way, I do emphasize the word reported because not all incidents of business email compromise are reported. But what was reported, again, I tracked from 2019 to 2023, and I tracked the count, I tracked the total losses, and I track the average loss. And that average loss is something that you can utilize if you're doing a business case or need ROI and have not had a fraud and need a number to use. You can use the average loss per the FBI. All right, so let's get started. And I have for from 2019 to 2023, the count, the total losses, and the average loss. Now, for the count, I'm going to break it down into two numbers because the FBI reports it based on year, but I'm going to break it down per day. It actually doesn't change a lot, but I'm going to tell you that so you know how much or how many of the 1,300 per day in 2019 up to the 2,400 per day in 2023 were from business email compromise. So in 2019, the count per year was 23,761. Now that averages out to a 65 count per day. And by the way, both of those numbers were the highest ever for business email compromise. Not sure why. And again, this is based on reports. So if you go then to the total losses, you know what? Let's just stay on count and go all the way to 2023. So that was it for 2019. 2020, it actually went down to 19,369, and that's only 53 per day. And it kind of stayed there in 2021. Actually, it got closer to 20,000 at 19,994, which is 55 per day. 2022 was 21,832. So it's going back up again, and that's 60 per day. And it's about 60 per day again in 2023, the newest numbers, because the count for the year is 21,849. That is almost identical to 2022. So the counts, if we look at it from 2019 at 23,761 at 65 incidents per day, really decreased all the way through the latest numbers in 2023 to 21,000, right, 849 or 60 incidents per day. So it really decreased, but that's just the count decreased. Of those that actually did report it, right, and we have their numbers, the next one or the next two are the ones that unfortunately increased. So the total losses starting in 2019, and remember that was the highest number of incidents, the total losses in 2019 was 1.7 billion, and it stayed that way in 2020. Now, you can tell the results of the pandemic, even though the count from 2020 to 2021 stayed relatively the same, under 20,000. The total losses increased from 1.7 billion in 2020 to 2.4 billion. And in 2022, that went to 2.7 billion, and in 2023, it went to 2.9 billion. So even though the count has decreased, the total losses has increased. Now, what you should care about or can care about that you can include in your business case or ROI is the average loss per incident. Now, the average loss per incident in 2019 with that 1.7 billion was $72,000. In 2020, that rose to $92,000. In 2021, it rose to $120,000. In 2022, it rose to $123,000. And in 2023, it is now $135,000. So if you need that a number in there because you haven't yet had a fraud, and by the way, if you are looking at ROI and you are creating a business case to get some type of either platform or control so that you can avoid fraud without first having a fraud, that is really good, because usually I'll say by the time I get to groups, they've already had a fraud because they just never thought it would happen to them. So if you're being proactive, great. All right, so average loss went from 72,000 to 135,000, whereas the count of business email compromise scams reported anyway decreased from 23,000, almost 24,000 to almost 22,000. So the count decreased, but the average loss increased. Now, if you would like to take a look at this report, it's actually very interesting. The FBI does a great job at breaking down what those trends are, giving you more information on each one. They also have some pretty good infographics, like they'll tell you they've got one that talks about which state has the most victims, which state has the highest losses. You can see where your state is, but again, those infographics and those numbers include both consumer and business fraud. So, in addition to business email compromise, it includes all of the other fraud incidents reported as well. But it's still interesting to take a look at that. I will put a link to the IC3 2023 report in the show notes, as well as just the ic3.gov page, so that you can click on either to get more information from the FBI on fraudulent incidents in 2023. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 281st episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.